Hey guys, it's Austin here with Out Jeeping, and in today's video I'm going to be showing you guys how to replace the rear shocks on a Jeep Cherokee XJ. Now right here is a 99 Cherokee, but it's the same process for the 84 all the way to 2001. And it is a little bit more difficult process to do than the front shocks, so I'll show you guys how to do it, so let's get started. Alright, so we're under the rear vehicle here by the rear axle, and we have two shocks obviously that go down to the rear axle, and then the upper end goes to the body. Now over here on the driver's side it's going to be towards the rear, so you can just get it from the back side. And then if we look over here on the passenger side, as you can see it's on the front of the axle, so we can get at it from in front of the rear passenger wheel over here. So on this Jeep it does have 307,000 miles on it, and we've owned it since about 250,000, and it had all the original shocks on there. And I think I replaced this one back here from another Jeep, and I just never got to the other side. So actually the other side on the rear passenger is actually the original shock that was on there from the factory, so it's probably long overdue for a replacement. But we're going to be replacing both of them today with some brand new ones. And basically it's 3 bolts per shock, so we got an 18mm nut on the bottom holding it to the axle, and then we got two 13mm bolts holding it from the top. So in the process for taking these off, it's not too difficult on the bottom here. We just have an 18mm nut, but to take precautions I'm actually going to heat this up since it is a little bit rusty and it's never been taken off before. I've actually had this break off before, and you end up having to cut the stud off on here and drilling out a new hole to put a new bolt in and then re-weld it, and it's kind of a pain in the butt. So I'm just going to take a precaution and heat this up so that way it doesn't snap. Now moving up to the top of the shock, this is where it kind of gets difficult on these Cherokees. So they got two 13mm bolts going up into a welded nut, and 9 times out of 10 that's going to snap off. So what we're going to end up having to do is just let that snap off, and then we're going to pound out the welded nut that's inside there. And then we can either insert a flange nut that a few companies make, or you can actually just insert a normal bolt, kind of fish it through there, and it's not overly difficult to do. I couldn't justify paying $30 for 2 flange nuts just to save yourself 5 minutes. So I'm just going to feed through some normal 5/16 bolts, and it should take care of it just fine. So to start off, I'm going to take a torch and heat up this nut, and then I'm going to spray a little bit of PB Blaster on it to help kind of shock it. Then hopefully this should come free. Make sure not to burn that bushing up too much. Oh, look at that. Coming out like butter. Alright. Then we got a washer right in front of this. Pop that off as well. And then try pulling on it and wiggling it and try to break that free from the stud. Just kind of work it off and give it a little force like that, and it should pop clean off. Alright, so with that bottom bolt removed, we can go and start on the top up here. I'm just going to take an impact, and if they snap, they snap. I'm already expecting them to snap, so it's not a big deal. So I got 13mm on extension, and we'll zip these guys out. Wow. I am utterly surprised. That bolt actually came out. Over 300,000 miles in Wisconsin. Well, that bolt actually came out normally too. It's weird because whenever I placed the other shock on the other side, about a few years ago, both of them broke. But this side actually seems fine, which is surprising. But that's less work for what we got to do. Alright, so with that one shock out, I'm going to repeat the process on the other side here and get this one out as well. Alright, so as for the driver's side here, I actually got lucky again, and one of them came out, and then one of them actually broke off right in here, so I am going to have to punch this one out, but it's not too bad. 3 for 4, so I only have to deal with one. So there's a couple ways on how you can knock out that welded nut. You can either try with a punch and a hammer. That might take a while and might be kind of hard to do, especially up under here, and you might get a bunch of rust, and either way it's going to take a while to do. So the other option is using an air hammer, and that's going to knock it out within seconds. So I'm actually going to go over to my friend's house down the road, and he has an air hammer, and we're going to knock that out so that way we can throw in the new shocks. Alright, so with the threads I was able to save on here because the bolts came out, I'm actually going to be running a tap through them since they are kind of rusty, and just to clean them up a little bit so that way when we install this everything goes smoothly. Now the size for this is just a normal 5/16 by 18 thread pitch UNC. So I'm just going to run a tap through here and clean out any rust or any burrs that might be on these threads. And I actually don't have the proper square socket for this tap or a tap tool, so I'm just going to be very careful with these vice grips and just take it slow. Now obviously using the vice grips is not the most ideal situation, but I'm mostly just chasing these threads. I'm not setting any new threads, so this is just cleaning them up to get any rust or burrs off. And once it's all the way through, you can take it all the way out and start on the next hole. Alright, so over here we have the old shocks that we just took out of the rear, and this was an old Monroe one. Not a big fan of these anymore. They really don't last that long. Probably only about 30,000 miles is what you're going to get out of them. Then over here is the original Chrysler Mopar one, and it's actually still not too bad. It doesn't kick out anymore, but the bushing's all shot in that, and for 300,000 miles it definitely needs a new one. So we're going to be replacing them today with these AC Delco ones. I'll put a link in the description below on where you can find them. These run about 32 bucks a piece, so they're not terribly expensive. I've had great luck with these in the past, and I believe they're nitrogen gas charged, so they'll shoot up nicely. So for now we're actually going to keep this wire on there until we get it bolted onto the top, and then we can cut that, and then we should be able to easily slide on the bottom. That way we're not fighting to get this thing in there when it's fully extended. As you know, brand new shocks, trying to push them up and get the bolt through is kind of difficult. So we're going to leave that on there until we need to cut that. And while we're at it, since those bolts did come out, we can replace them with either the old ones, or if you want to spend a little few cents just to buy some new ones, that's what I did. That way you got nice grade 8 hardware with clean threads, and they're not rusty at all. I still am going to put a little bit of anti-seize on these, so that way if I do ever have to take them off in the future, they should come out nicely. Then along with that washer on each bolt. Alright, so to start off, to make it a little bit easier and less messier, I'm just going to put some anti-seize right up here in these welded nuts, so that way I'm not trying to balance bolts on my finger and try not to get anti-seize on you, because this stuff does not like to come off. Alright, so now we're going to take the fork end of the shock and feed it up through here. And I'm going to take one bolt with a washer on it, let it switch hands, and feed it through one of the holes. Now these are only about 1 inch long and should do just fine. Now since I cleared out those threads, this goes in by hand nicely, so that way I'm not trying to get a wrench all in here trying to hold in the shock. Now since the other side's a little bit close to the exhaust, I'm actually just going to put it on a socket extension and thread it in by hand this way. Alright, so with those two in there by hand, I'm just going to take a ratchet and snug these up. Nothing too tight, just tight enough. Alright, so now we're ready to reconnect it down here on the axle side, and before I slip this on, I'm actually going to put a little bit of grease on this shank right over here, right after the threads, because this is actually a pivot point when the suspension is under compression. So it's going to be moving back and forth, and to prevent any premature wear on this rubber bushing, I'm just going to put a little bit of grease right there. So now I'm ready to cut this wire right here, and it's actually going to start extending the shock, so we got to be very careful, and once it gets down to the height where this bolt is for the axle, we're going to try and slip it on that shaft. right there, and that popped right in place. Perfect. I'm gonna go and cut the rest of this off. Okay, last up, we just gotta put this washer and nut back on, and once again, I'm gonna put a little bit of anti-seize on these threads to prevent any problems in the future in case this does get seized on there. Got our washer and then our nut. I should also mention, if your vehicle is not on the ground like mine is, if it's up in the air, either on a hoist or it's all jacked up, you're going to want to tighten up all these bolts when the suspension is under compression. That way to prevent any premature wear in your bushings, because you want to tighten it up where it's going to sit level. Then once again, just tighten this up nice and snug. Nothing crazy tight. Right there is good. Alright, that's nice and solid. Now we can go and do the other side. Alright, so over here on the driver's side, this is where we had that broken off bolt, and I just went over to my friend's house and used this air chisel and pounded out that welded nut in there. So now we're ready to actually reinsert a bolt from the top side, and it's actually not too difficult to do. If you don't want to spend the 30 bucks and get the nut strips like I did, you can easily do this with basically a wrench of the size of the bolt you have. So this is a 1/2 inch wrench with a 5/16 bolt, and I just put a little bit of electrical tape around it so that way it holds into place. And there is little access holes, so if you look up over here right where this field connection is, I actually disconnected this to get it out of the way, but we can get up here and stick our wrench in up behind there and kind of feed it through, find the hole, and then pop it in. And this way it should help kind of hold it in place as we tighten it down. And once everything's tightened down, since this is only electrical tape holding it in, we can twist this off and break free of that tape, and that way we have a wrench back. So with experience, I've noticed that it is a little bit easier to do the passenger side because there's not as much length over here for getting into that access hole. So on the driver's side over here, the longer 1/2 inch wrench you have is going to be easier, so that way you're not kind of losing your wrench back in there. But right now, I'm just going to take this and try and feed it through and find that hole. Alright, as you can see, it's popping through. Just got to get it on the right angle because it's hitting the top of the floor. So this is where having kind of a shorter bolt helps. And there we go. So that's still locked into the wrench right there. So we can set our new shock up in here, put a nut on this side, and then put a bolt through since over here is not broken at all, and then we should be able to tighten it up. So to help a little bit with this install process, we can just put a nut on here, only a few threads. Since these do have open forks at the end, we can just slide it onto there, and that way it should hold up that side of the shock as we put the other side bolt in. So I'm just going to leave it right there. So now I'll get the shock, slide it over that bolt, and then thread in this one. Now once again, we can tighten this up with a ratchet. When you're doing that one that has the bolt going through the top, just hold on to the wrench so that way it doesn't get too jammed up in there. That way it should be easier to remove it. Alright, so with those two tightened up, now we can remove our wrench. I'm just going to twist it around, break free that electrical tape, and then we can pop it out. Just like that. Now you can repeat that 3 more times if your bolts broke all the way around, and that'll save you 30 bucks. Now once again down here, just going to put a little bit of grease around here where the pivot point is. Now I'm going to cut this cable and we're going to pop it into place. There you go. Cut the rest of it off. And put a little anti-seize on these threads. And we got our washer and then our nut. Alright, and that's all it is to it. Alright guys, that's going to do it for today's video. As you saw, it's not too complicated of a process, and by using that wrench technique, you'll save yourself 30 bucks because those little nut strips are overpriced for what they are, but they can be a lifesaver if you don't want to have to mess with doing that little wrench trick. But I'll post a link in the description below on where you can find these rear shocks as well as some nut strips that you can use instead. But overall, if you guys find this video helpful, make sure to like and subscribe to the Out Jeeping YouTube channel. And if you have any more questions or comments, make sure to post them below and I'll be happy to answer. So I want to thank you guys for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.